Commissioner Williams.
I'm searching for your name. Because
Bob-
as long
Bob-
as you're sitting there.
Bob Hinton.
Bob, yes.
Hinton,
Yes, ma'am.
would you like to add anything from your perspective?
Yes, I've been in the staff for almost 40 years, and so I've seen a lot and testified before the North Carolina Utilities Commission well over 30 times. For a host of finance and investment and planning and electric utility industry and a host of things. Mr. Fitzgerald and the Sabre team testified and helped the commission with a solid financing order to start the process. Now we had to implement, issue the bond, do the structuring, marketing, pricing. A director came to me and asked me, well, I know you weren't intrinsically involved in his testimony, but would you take over now? My heart sunk. I was asked to do something I wasn't really prepared to do. I took that role and I tried to do the best I could as consumer advocates. That's what the public staff is, as your ORS is the same. And but I didn't have the background, and it became so evident that I didn't have the background that the Sabre team offered. And I wished I could have pulled them out of my pocket on numerous times when I was a member of the BAT team. I can't go into the details of the BAT conversation because obviously they're confidential, but I can say this. You can look at my letter. It's not a certification letter because I wouldn't let my lawyer call it that. It's what's called a letter of, I'll say, support. I filed it on November 18th, 2021 for the public staff. I was the face. I wrote that letter. I used the words, the public staff believes that the process will likely result in the lowest storm recovery charges. Now, trust me, I struggled with that sentence. I struggled with will likely. I mean, I could have said probably, but I said will likely. I did not clarify what will likely really meant. I said will likely. The point was, I was always in the BAT team feeling inadequate. Now, you all have made decisions over the past years of the commission, just like North Carolina, just as I would testify and make recommendations. There's a level of confidence. That's a word we've used a lot today. You need a high level of confidence to ensure the consumer is well served. I came to the conclusion, and in association with Sabre partners ever since, that they are the team you want on your side, bar none. They have no conflicts. I think that's an important thing that Joe has talked about. And I think the essence of their knowledge. I mean, these people are the treasury. And when I was first with the staff, one of these men I used to read about in Merrill Lynch Bond Roundup. And I go, wow. And as a young analyst, when I was only 25 at that time, I was amazed of their knowledge of the bond market. Because you know the bond market is different than equities. We can all be an equity analyst, but we can't be a bond analyst overnight. But they had that knowledge, and they bring that to the table today. So I want to urge you, for that level of confidence that I lacked, I urge you to hire this team as your advisor.
I know if you'd like to talk to our other people on the bench, Brian Maher from Exxon in terms of.
Yeah, I could say, this is Brian. Can you hear me? I could say a few words. I've been retired from Exxon for quite a few years now. I spent 35 years in finance and done billions of dollars of financing and complex financial transactions. And the reason I decided to sign on as a financial advisor for some of these transactions with Joe is because he did some really good work for Exxon, even when he was a banker. He was willing to stand up to his bosses who just wanted to get a deal done and say, no, wait, the client doesn't really want that, doesn't need that. And you don't always get that from bankers. So he has a level of integrity that you wouldn't normally have found in the banking institutions. And that's why he doesn't do it anymore. So I think that the key thing, though, is that he's a tireless worker. And I mean, you can hardly believe how much he cares about the ratepayer. I mean, we've been hearing this for 20 years now, and it's absolutely true. He's as interested in the ratepayer as the commission is, and that's quite a bit. And and look at the other parties in the transaction. I mean, Duke's a great company, but are they really interested in the ratepayers' best interests in this transaction, or do they want to get their money and move on to something else? Probably both, but they're split because they don't have the same need to satisfy the ratepayers that you and Joe Fitzgerald would have. And then you look at the investment bankers, the underwriters, and it's way worse. Duke would be a hero compared to them. I mean, they want to get as many transactions done in as much of a cookie cutter way as they possibly can. And I saw this at Exxon. I mean, they'd be coming in and offering me transactions that had nothing to do with what Exxon wanted or needed. And so when they see this transaction, you've got to take into consideration that these investment bankers have investor clients and they have issuing clients. And they're trying to balance to serve both of them. So they would like their investor clients to get good rates, and then they also would like their issuing clients to, get good rates on the downside, offer lower interest costs. But, you can't exactly have it both ways. And I think you will see that the trend, and unfortunately, that what's been happening to securitization bonds has not been our friend recently. There are ways to use techniques and keep pressure on the bankers. There are ways to bring down the spreads over treasuries, and Sabre has been able to do that in the past, and they can still do it. And some of them are technical. Some of them you get into the offering day, and you sit there next to the bankers, and when they proudly say that we're 4 times oversubscribed, then you say, okay, well, now I guess the rate we're offering is too high. Let's go back and get 2 times oversubscribed and see how well the ratepayer can do. That's one thing. The other thing is and this is the last thing I'll say, in the actual offering material, you would like it as plain English as possible so it doesn't look very esoteric, because it really isn't all that esoteric. And you also want to make sure that you're not afraid of something like the SEC staff when they make a proclamation. I mean, when we were at Exxon, we would submit what we believed was right, expecting the SEC staff would come back to us and say, well, we don't necessarily agree. That's what they're supposed to do, because that's why they're the SEC staff, right? But that doesn't mean you take everything they say and cave into it. And that's exactly what's been happening lately. And that's why these governors who really do want to do well for the ratepayers, these governors are fighting to get asset-backed securities unrelated from securitizations and get securitizations back where they belong, closer to AAA corporates, because these are excellent high-class securities with the state guarantee and the commitments. This is a fantastic security. And so this is my last thing. I think we all have to work, and you will be doing that as hard as possible to make sure your ratepayer gets the best possible deal.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers, gentlemen.
I don't know, Ed Fitzgerald, who has joined, you haven't met before, I would like to just ask, since he was an investor, might give just a few moments of conversation about, since you were on the buy side enjoying some of those juicy yields, but also willing to negotiate when we wanted to get on top of treasury corporates. Maybe just a couple minutes of your perspective. He's joining our team as more depth for these types of certifications.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, historically we've seen utility recovery bonds trade in a very wide range as compared to AAA rated corporate bonds. And I highlight the range there because, it can be as tight as 10 to 20 basis points and as wide as, 75 to 100. Some of that may be due to market conditions at a particular time. Others may be due to the size or the first time nature of an issuer coming to market, which I would say, and I think the Sabre team would agree, if a deal price is very wide as a first time issuer, that the bank probably could have done a better job explaining the strengths of the program and the benefits of investing, benefits to the ratepayers, and the strength of the bonds to the investor base so they can drive tighter pricing. To go to a point that Brian made, in many instances, dealers will get transactions well oversubscribed, but won't tighten spreads dramatically thereafter. Maybe they'll come in 5 or 10 basis points, they'll get a few players to drop, maybe not, and then they'll allocate. In some instances, we've seen where an issuer takes a hard line and they say, well, you're 12 times oversubscribed. Tighten the pricing 25 basis points. Tighten it more. Let's see what happens. Who drops out? In those cases, you may find that there's substantial savings still left on the table in the normal syndication process that occurs. So that's something worth, thinking about how the commission would like the underwriters to approach marketing. As was mentioned before, they do have clients on both sides, and you want the clients, to evaluate the transaction and participate in it. So, there's a balancing act that dealers have to walk between getting the absolute lowest price and also ensuring that their investor-based clients are rewarded for the time and effort that they put in the ability to purchase some securities. And that's the fulcrum, I think, that a lot of players in the market, maybe don't use to their advantage as much as they possibly could. And what I mean by that is citing the case where an issuer came in and significantly tightened the pricing and had numerous parties drop. In my experience, there are times when these bonds are traded very cheaply and are just, really attractive instruments. And, parties come out of the woodwork to participate in them and they don't get priced out of the deal. Other times when transactions tighten dramatically, you may see people drop. So, don't underestimate the impact of the syndication process, the involvement of the treasurers of the corporations and or lead parties here to drive that pricing in to meet your standards of getting the lowest price possible for your consumer base. One last comment on the securities. The securities, they are not that complicated. People make them sound complicated, but they're really not. And they have a tremendous track record in terms of performance relative to other securities. And further, they have a reliance on the ongoing production and distribution and consumption of electricity in the ratepayer base, right? Or the geographic locale where the receivables, in essence, are being securitized, right? Or the future payment flows are being securitized. So I think that also that does point out that there is more of a corporate, involvement here than you might find in a typical securitization where someone originates automobile loans, packages to get them together, and sells them. Once those loans are sold to the marketplace, then the performance is based on collecting and distributing payments. That's very different than a ratepayer obligation or a recovery bond, where the corporation is still has to either procure or generate the electricity and move it there. And this also for a very long period of time. So the mechanisms built into the securities, most, especially the true up, really provide a strong foundation for the securities and have led to their great track record and performance. But the reason I bring up the corporate bonds is it is a larger market, and getting utility players, people that buy utility corporate bonds into the book could be a positive, because these bonds will look cheap to many other things in the very highly rated, high-grade corporate bond market. So I'll stop there. I'll answer any questions if anybody has them, but otherwise, I'll turn it back to Joe.
One of the things in that news article talked about the investors being extremely concentrated. We have data that will show you that the top 10 of this higher market, 10 investors own almost 30% of all the outstanding bonds. That is extremely concentrated. So if you so they have a lot of pricing power. So when you've heard comments like, say, well, we know who's been participating and who hasn't, and we'll ask whether, well, if you're selling to the same usual suspects, you're probably going to get the same usual price. What you need to do is expand the market, do more work. I can tell you as an investment banker, when I was there, it was like, let's move it along. Let's move it along. You know, having to make 10 calls for $5 million orders to get 50 million versus one call for a $50 million order, we'd much rather do the one call. The one call for $50 million order, he's at 505. Maybe I can get those other people who are buy and hold, who are more safety oriented, people who will be willing to accept lower yields for the safety. Other people, they're trying to get as much juice, what we call juice, yield as possible. And when you see the reports, fatter return, outsized, what do you think that means? I mean, it means that it's more than really it ought to be. And our job is to work through inform you of that, first work and set up a structure in the pre-issuance review, make sure the financing order is not restrictive to look at things. Because, for example, I did notice in one of the settlement, there was a sentence where Duke said, the QITP will be able to attend any meeting that the company makes to investors. And it was kind of, well, you kind of want to be where when the underwriter is making presentations to investors. I like to see that. And I normally did get to see that, be invited and participate. We can show you actually some film clips of where we did and had participation. We also, in Florida, we had a roadshow where we actually met with investors, with members of the commission staff. So you sort of look at that and it's like, well, okay, you may not be making all the presentations. All those other ones are being done by the underwriters. We don't know what's really being said. So we want to know what's being said, how it's being positioned, and get into that and create, I think someone called it creative tension or something like that. But that's where you have to, as President Reagan said, quoting a Russian proverb, trust but verified, cut the cards, build a deck, and be honest with what you see. And that's what we hold ourselves to. We're honest with what we'll see. We'll communicate it to you, and you can make the decision. You give it with our recommendation or ask us questions in public. And we're happy to be, we've given testimony on this in multiple jurisdictions. None of our testimony, I think, has ever survived cross. I don't think anybody has been able to impugn any of the data that we have. Maybe, I'm pretty sure. My memory hasn't failed me on that. But I think that gives you the comfort that you need. And not just this transaction, because there's going to be more down the road. And it's probably, the industry needs so much capital that this is going to go beyond storm recovery bonds. This is going to start, I mean, AEP already has done for rate base in West Virginia, and there's other talk about using this. And that's why we've got to make sure that the right precedents are set, because it's harder to overcome bad precedents. It's not impossible. We did it in Texas, and we did it in West Virginia and in Florida in 2016. But it's better if we think ahead, make sure we get the right precedents, the right basis, and we have a team here beyond me, and I appreciate my comments from my colleagues, but it really is a team effort. And you think you've seen that in our previous assignment, our detail, our thoroughness, that's what we bring. And we're willing to do it in writing, in the open, and really would be honored to have this opportunity to serve.
Thank you very much. Any further commissioner questions? Hearing none, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here, particularly being here in person, and thank you for your team that's here virtually, and hope you have safe travels back. We're going to make a decision, hopefully within a couple of weeks, and certainly everyone will know. Thank you very much.
And if there's any other written questions, we'll be happy to respond. Thanks.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.